Okay, so the title of this webinar is First Steps to Setting Up Supported Internships. So let's get on and think about that. Welcome to the second of 5 NatSpec practice-focused webinars developed by NatSpec and ASA to support the delivery of high-quality study programs as part of Ascend Workforce Development Programme. This webinar is entitled First Steps to Setting Up Supported Internships and aims to give you practical advice, guidance and tips to do just that. We hope that by the end of it, you will be able to go away with an initial action plan of at least 3 first steps. My name is Caro Birtles. Until recently, I've been working with National Star College, recruiting and assessing for their supported internships. As part of this, I have delivered training to employers to support them to have a greater understanding of how they can support interns in the workplace and the benefits of doing so. I have also advised other organisations on setting up supported internships. I have seen for myself the changes in interns and the confidence they develop being included in the workplace and been witness to some of the great outcomes they achieve. I'm being helped to deliver this webinar by Aidan Bryant, who was previously on a supported internship. Do you want to say hi?
Hi.
Later in the webinar, Aidan will give you some learner voice advice on setting up supported internships. He will also help me by putting any questions you may have at the end of the webinar into themes so we can answer them. The aims of the webinar are to understand what supported internships are and explore different models, to identify key steps in setting up supported internships with particular emphasis on ways to engage stakeholders, and to go away with some first step actions. The webinar is divided into 5 sections. What are supported internships and why offer them? Supported internship models, engaging stakeholders, other key steps, and a summary. So before we get going, and as inspiration, let's look at what a previous intern has said. It feels fantastic that when someone asks, "Where do you work?" I can answer, "Since I was 16, I wanted to work, and now I've done it." When you find the right people who understand your needs, you can't go wrong. Okay, so let's get on with the first section. What are supported internships? If you're going to set up supported internships, you're going to have to sell them to a number of stakeholders, such as senior management, employers, and interns. So it's important that you understand exactly what they are. To make sure we are all working from the same definition, let's think about what supported internships are. Supported internships are personalised study programmes based primarily at an employer. They are intended to enable young people with learning difficulties and/or disabilities to achieve sustainable paid employment by equipping them with the skills they need for work through learning in the workplace. Having defined supported internships, we need to think about the requirements to deliver them. You will need to think about these requirements as you plan your first steps. Jobs must work for both the intern and the employer. They must be real jobs, so not jobs which are just made up so that somebody can have work experience, but something that really contributes to the business. Both the intern and the employer should receive ongoing support as part of a supported internships. Most likely, this will be from a jobs coach. The programme will last for about a year, and includes a work placement of at least 6 months. An intern should take part in a structured form of learning alongside their time in the workplace. English and maths to an appropriate level are included in the programme, although not necessarily accredited, and that will depend on the individual. And there is also a chance to study for a qualification or qualifications if that is relevant. So that might be something like food hygiene for somebody who wants to work in the catering industry. So what's the intention of a supported internship? The intention of the programme, which is clearly shared with all involved, is that wherever possible, the young person with learning difficulties or disabilities should move into sustained paid employment at the end of the programme by equipping them with the skills they need for work through learning in the workplace. Whilst the ideal outcome from supported internships will be the offer of a paid job, other outcomes include building up a CV, changing the perception of employers, changing the perception of a person's family that they can work, improving English and maths, including handling money and interacting with the public, and becoming independent travellers. You need to think about how you are going to record this progress. RAPA, recognising and recording progress and achievement, which some of you may already use, offers a good template to do this. The previous NatSpec webinar covered RAPA and can be found on the NatSpec website. And we're going to talk about this in a little more detail later in the webinar. So, what learner group are supported internships aimed at? Supported internships are one type of study programme specifically aimed at young people aged 16 to 24 who have an education, health and care plan. Although in some cases they've been set up for other learners, for example through adult education funding for learners who are 19 plus, or for learners without an EHCP, claiming Element 1 funding and using Access to Work to fund the job coaching. Interns need to be people who want to prove themselves as contributors in the world of work and move into employment, but need extra support to do so. You need to think about how you're going to recruit this group of learners. This may be as a pathway through other courses in your organisation, through working with feeder schools, or working with a local authority. So why supported internships? As well as individual progress, supported internships can promote change in society and increase awareness of individual needs, not just in the world of employment, but in our communities as a whole. They can break down the barriers to employment for people with disabilities or different abilities. They equip the intern with the knowledge, skills and attitudes necessary for successful employment. And they support employers to understand how they can make reasonable adjustments to support employees with different abilities or needs. Your key reference point for this, and where what we've talked about has come from, is the Department for Education Guidance, which was revised in 2017. And you can link into that at the top website on this slide. Preparing for Adulthood, which is the next link, and BASE are also really useful websites to look at. So in thinking about supported internships, it's important to place them in context. The model for supported internships came out of Project Search in America. Entry-level positions in a hospital involving systematic tasks were offered to people with disabilities. Based on this model, the DFE ran a trial in 2012 to 13, which involved 15 colleges. And the DFE guidance, which we talked about in the previous slide, draws on this trial. The introduction of study programs in 2013 recommended supported internships as a type of study program for people aged 16 to 24 with an education, health and care plan to enable them to gain the skills, experience and confidence to move into employment. Following on from this later legislation, such as the Children and Families Act 2014 and associated Code of Practice, and Ofsted's Moving Forward report in 2016, stressed the importance of good outcomes, personalisation, good information, advice and guidance, staff training relevant to learners' needs, and partnership working, all of which need to be borne in mind when setting up your supported internships. But despite this very clear pointer towards supported internships, FE Week in June 2017 reported that progress had been really patchy, and Ofsted reported that supported internships are successful, but too few are available. In January 2017, the DFE released figures which said that while 65,742 people had education, health and care plans, only 715 people were on supported internships. This may be because supported internships aren't being recorded properly, or it may be because people are only offering supported internships to very small numbers. The government is concerned about this and has just announced the setting up of £9.7 million fund to support local supported internship forums and job coaching training. So now really is the time to be thinking about supported internships. Further statistics published in December 2017 bear this out. 1/8 of institutions offered supported internships, covering just over a quarter of the population of post-16 learners with SEND. Half of general colleges and a quarter of special schools offered supported internships to post-16 learners. And if that wasn't enough, look at these statistics which illustrate the vast pool of untapped employees out there. So less than half of disabled people are in employment, compared to 80% of the non-disabled population. 5.8% of adults with a learning disability known to local authorities are in a job. Only 15% of adults with autism are in full-time paid employment. 79% of adults with autism on out-of-work benefits want to work. And 4.6 million disabled people and people with long-term health conditions are out of work. These are potentially employees who will have above average attendance, punctuality, enthusiasm, and an eye for detail, to name but a few of the skills they might bring. That's a really good selling point when you go to engage employers. So now we'll move on to section 2, looking at different models of supported internships. Providers are free to design their supported internships to fit their local circumstances and to meet the needs of their learners, as long as the basic requirements we've already outlined are adhered to. After this presentation, you might find it useful to watch the film, the link of which is below, which will make the feel of supported internships more real. It was made by Pure Innovations about their supported internships hosted at Manchester Airport. I've spoken to a variety of providers who are running supported internships, each with their own individual take on it. When thinking about your model, some of the things you need to think about are partnerships. A key partnership to consider is how you work with your local authority. You will need to have a conversation with them to see what their thoughts are. Again, individual authorities vary in how they want to work, with varying levels of involvement. Providers that work closely with their local authorities say that this is key. Involvement ranges from referring interns and attending reviews to providing job coaches through employment services. Another partnership you may want to consider is working with another provider who has expertise in employment and can provide the job coaching. This means you can tap into their expertise without having to upskill or recruit staff. Whatever you decide to do, effective job coaching will be key to the success of your supported internship. They will offer on-the-job support to both the intern and the employer, will sell the concept to employers, both initially and to achieve sustained employment at the end of the programme, and will affect change in practice. They need to have experience supporting and championing people with a range of disability, to be able to handle rejection and to have the resilience to keep going, and to have salesperson skills, to be trained in systematic instruction, to have excellent organisational skills, and to be experienced in assessing and recording progress. That's a really broad skill set. Some providers have used current staff as job coaches, such as learning support workers. This has the advantage that they already know the learners. However, they will need additional training for the role, such as systematic instruction. One of the current criticisms of supported internships is that job coaches are not sufficiently trained for their roles, so that's definitely something which needs thinking about. You will also need to think about whether or not you want to be based at one employer or use multiple employers. Your decision around this may depend on your local job market. If you are based at one employer, you need to make sure they have a variety of roles to meet the individual skills and aspirations of the interns. If you watch the film about Manchester Airport, you'll see that they have got a variety of roles, including administration, catering, and portering. Being based at one employer means there is less travel for the job coach and they can be on hand more quickly. However, it may limit the ability to meet the aspirations of interns, which using individual employers may offer. As we have seen, structured learning is a key component of supported internships. Some providers offer this as a day at college, whilst others have a base room at the employer. The latter may have the advantage of being more like being in full-time employment and also offers more flexibility with hours, as you may be able to offer an hour or two a day rather than a full day. Which works for you may depend on the employer model you develop. Generally, groups of interns enjoy getting together to share their experiences at work and support each other to develop their skills and overcome challenges. Another consideration is your staff team structure and their job descriptions. Whatever your model, you will need staff who are passionate and enthusiastic about supporting people to learn the skills necessary to step into employment and affect change in society. Supported internships take a lot of work and resources to get going and sustain. You will need to think about things like who will have overall responsibility, who will liaise with employers, who will be responsible for transition into employment, and who will do the administration. I would suggest that a lot of this falls into the job coach remit, but you will need to make it work for you. Review how this has gone and not be afraid to make changes. One provider I spoke to said their supported internships became more effective when the person in charge of supported internships became in charge of all foundation learning programs, so that effective pathways were established, leading to a supported internship where appropriate. That's also something you need to think about. How do supported internships fit into other programs you offer, and how do these programs support the internships? So let's take a few minutes to pause for thought. Make a few notes about what model you think might work for you.
Okay, that's cool.
Okay, so hopefully you've had time to digest some of that and think about the model that you might take forward. So now we're going to move on to think about key steps. And perhaps the most important one of these is engaging stakeholders. You'll need to sell the supported internships to all stakeholders. So it's important that you think about who they are and how you are going to engage them. So again, just take a few minutes to think about who your main stakeholders are. Okay, so these are your main stakeholders. So we've got the intern at the centre here. We've got the intern's family, the employer, senior management in your organisation, your college staff, the local authority, and a job coach or training provider. And you may have thought of some others. So obviously a key stakeholder is employers. When you meet with potential employers, you'll need to sell the idea of supported internships and the advantages that they can offer. One big engineering company I have worked with said the main incentive for them setting up supported internships was promoting employee job satisfaction, as surveys at a company already running supported internships showed that staff involved in it felt more fulfilled in their jobs. This means that staff are more likely to stay in their jobs, and with recruitment running at an average of £4,000, that's worth thinking about. It's important that employers realise that they are only providing a work placement, not a job, at the end of the programme. Although, of course, if that does happen, that's great. You will need to support employers to think about job buddies for each role. That's a person or persons within the team who builds a relationship of trust with the intern, and changing practices such as introducing working interviews rather than all interviews, so interns can show that they can do the job when they might not be able to articulate this. One of the problems I see with sustained employment for people with disabilities is what happens when the sympathetic manager changes and how the practice is systemically embedded within the organisation. It's useful to offer the employer training so they can understand how to support the intern, with learner voice being particularly effective in this. This helps to build confidence, as it is often fear of the unknown which stands in the way. Recruiting interns is obviously key. You may need to involve families in this, depending on the age of the intern. Families often have worries about benefits and how these will be affected by working. It's important to get independent advice about this and use local expertise to do a better off calculation. Families often don't think their person will be able to work. It's important to involve them in reviews and discussions to show that they can and raise aspirations. Aidan, who's been an intern and as previously mentioned is helping me with this webinar, will now offer a learner voice perspective.
So hi there everyone. Yeah, my name is Aidan. I was part of an internship. It didn't quite work out for me, but I'm looking into getting into an internship again, hopefully in a different workplace. I thought I'd just sort of give a few moments of my time to kind of talk about my experience and kind of what I've learned. Things that I think are quite important is to obviously match the individual with the right job and work environment. People like myself on the autistic spectrum, or lots of different abilities, tend to have very particular niches, so to speak. So kind of getting them in that kind of right environment can really kind of help kick things off, really. I'd also suggest kind of easing them in gradually, sort of low complexity to start off with, because obviously a lot of people can get quite anxious, and obviously if it's quite a complex job in a complex environment, sometimes they can be a bit confused as to what to do for quite some time. So if it's a small task, small, but build from there, I think is the best thing. I think as a work buddy or as an internship, you need to check on these internees and make sure that they are doing the right job, checking in on them. They may need quite frequent help, give praise when needed, so that they know that they're doing the right thing. Obviously, a lot of the people on the internship program might have mental health issues. So ensuring that they have someone that they can talk to through their problems, and so they can get help, so they don't bottle up any emotions or anything that they have going on in their lives. A familiar routine, a weekly schedule is a good idea. Obviously, a lot of these people probably are looking forward to doing some work, and having that familiar routine, especially for someone on the spectrum, is a good idea to ensure that they feel productive and can maintain that productivity. Yeah, this is probably one of the most important aspects of this program, is to make sure that it's a supportive and inclusive environment with the possibility of engaging with lots of different people socially, so they feel like they are included and involved. Another sort of list of things that I've put is kind of do's and do nots, really. Things that I feel would be beneficial to the workplace is try not to feel like patronizing. People have mentioned this to me before, that this is quite a difficult thing to maintain because you have lots of people, lots of different abilities. But generally people seem to kind of talk down to me than talk to me as an individual. So yeah, try to avoid that on most occasions. Do offer the most help that you can possible. I mean, these are going to be people that want to learn, want to engage, and will obviously might struggle for a little bit, but once they're there, they will learn. Yeah, do help them to settle in. Make them feel the least stressed as possible, so they don't feel anxious. Do not assume that they are fine. They might be doing a job, but they might not feel entirely competent with it. Maybe they have some issue with the job that they're doing. So just, try and talk to them, see what problems they might have. Offer tips. I personally love tips. I'm not sure anyone else might, but it's a good suggestion, I think, to offer them ideas on where to improve. So me, I've got high functioning autism, and for me, I find that it can be quite beneficial to the workplace, and these are some of the benefits that I feel that it can have. One of them is that it's kind of like your own mini little scientist in their own particular little field of interest. So I myself, I love history, but yeah, they can ramble on about their own particular interests if you get to know them. Particularly love completing tasks. A lot of people on the spectrum love completing the tasks that they enjoy doing. Will identify problems and solutions you may not be aware of. So it is kind of more that they could be thinking in a different way and identify different things. They tend to learn quite quickly, keep track of information quite well, usually have quite a good memory, maybe only for very particular things that they're interested in, but generally they tend to keep track of it. Passionate about working and socializing. Generally, this is what I've found, because we tend to be quite discarded from the workplace. Generally, we tend to have this kind of getting into the job with great esteem, that it is a really good thing for us. And obviously having that social life, a lot of us generally don't have a very good social life, so having that social environment is really encouraging. May try to educate you in things that they feel are important. This is the same thing as above with the identifying problems and solutions, or sort of your own personal scientist, is that they tend to have information about things that you may not be even aware of, and they'll try and teach you about it, which is quite interesting. Can generally be effective in most positions in the company with the right support. So yeah, I think it's generally a good thing to have them around.
Okay, so thank you, Aidan. I think that he's given you some really good selling points when you take it to employers, and also when you take it to your senior management team or the board of governance. So let's think about selling the idea to senior management, including the board of governors. The SEN Code of Practice states that providers must use their best endeavours to secure the special education provision which people need. Offering supported internships is expected to be key to this. Delivering supported internships as part of your provision will provide evidence that your provision is personalised and outcome driven as required by Ofsted and the Code of Practice. Demonstrate working in partnership to contribute to the local offer. Solve the issue of the revolving door syndrome, where people go round and round different college courses but don't really achieve much progression or outcomes. Demonstrate responsiveness to a range of learners, and also show commitment to E&D. So we'll now consider some of the other key steps that you need to think about. So other key steps that you need to think about is your team and what roles and responsibilities you're going to give them. Along with that, you'll need to think about your resourcing and how you're going to do that. You need to think about staff training, and that's particularly for the role of the job coach. You need to think about employer training, and learner voice is really powerful there. Aidan and me have delivered quite a lot of employer training together, and having the learner voice there has been very, very impactful. You need to think about the quality assurance, and we've already mentioned the use of RAPA to quality assure your supported internships. You can find out about this on the link to the Excellent Gateway, where there's lots of useful resources. You've also got the link here to the recent NatSpec webinar about RAPA. And NatSpec are also in process of developing an online RAPA module, so do look out for that. It's also important to liaise with your funding department so that they can record the supported internships correctly on the ILR. And you also can think about using Access to Work for additional funding for things like transport for the intern to the employer or job coaching. So just take a few minutes to think about what action points you're going to take from this webinar. Okay, so let's move on to the summary. Okay, so to summarise, supported internships are a highly effective form of study programmes which can enable young people with SEND to make a successful transition into work. They build directly on young people's skills and aspirations. They provide an opportunity for a young person to not only acquire but demonstrate their skills in a real work environment. And they are recognised as effective by Ofsted and the Department for Education, reflected in recent government funding. But above all, we know they work. If you would like to have the opportunity to build on this webinar, NatSpec are running a series of whole-day workshops focusing on setting up and improving supported internships. This will be an opportunity to meet other providers, share practice, hear from experts, and go away with an initial action plan. So if you look at the NatSpec website for details of this, and we hope to see you there. So now it's time for Aidan and myself to thank you for listening to this webinar and to give you an opportunity to ask any questions, which we will do our best to answer. Thank you. Okay, Aidan, so what questions have we got?
So a few people are asking about the EHCP and asking basically about if they can get internships without this, the funding.
Okay, so the main funding or the main group that are on supported internships are people with education, health and care plans, so within that age of 16 to 24. However, in different locations, I've seen people get funding differently. So, for example, in Gloucestershire, where I live, there's been negotiation with the local authority, and they've seen how effective supported internships can be. And so they've used some of their adult education funding to fund 19+ learners with a self-declared disability. They did that for a pilot group of 7, and they've now expanded that to 20 because their research has shown that it's such a good investment and saves money long term because people are more fulfilled. So that will be a conversation with your local authority and your adult education to see if that's a model which they would be interested in doing. It's certainly very effective. I've also talked to providers where they have provided supported internships for people, and they've used the Element 1 funding, which you can draw down, and then they've used Access to Work to fund things like the job coaching and the transport and other things like that. So you would need to do a bit of a calculation to see whether that's going to work for you and how you could make that work. But those are certainly 2 ways where I've seen different groups of people go on to supported internships very effectively.
Yeah, because they're asking information about it, about the EHCP. So yeah. Someone was asking about how you can manage the initial transition into employment from the internship phase.
Okay, so the transition from the internship to employment is obviously key, and that's something which generally the job coach will support the intern to do. As I've said, employers aren't expected to offer a job, so if they do have vacancies, that's great, and people can apply for that. So the job coach and potentially the tutor as well would support the intern to be filling in the application forms, would be supporting the employer to think about different things like having a working interview, where the person could demonstrate that they can do it rather than having to articulate that they can do the job. They would help the intern to look for different jobs, to go to interviews, to find out where the interview is. And that's something that can happen from maybe about Easter during the internship, and then you can give support to the intern as they go into employment. It will be very different for different individuals, but hopefully that gives you a sort of overview of how that might happen.
Okay, there's two questions involving minimum hours, internship hours. Well, the recommended hours, or the minimum hours.
Yeah, I would have to go back to the guidance, but I think that it's 24 hours is the minimum amount.
Okay. Like, what stage of the year can you start an internship? Like an apprenticeship, or only start at the academic year?
Yeah, so they do tend to start in academic years, so in September. If you wanted to do that differently, you'd have to talk to your funding department and work out whether that was viable for your organisation. But generally, they do tend to run in academic years. Some people have the holidays as an academic year would, and some people don't, which has the advantage that it is more like employment, because actually employment, you don't get half term and holidays. So again, you need to see how the model is going to work for you.
A couple of questions are asking about accessing funding. So one was asking about access to work funding, and it's quite difficult to get. Is there a template?
Yeah, there is a template for access to work. What I can do is I can attach that template when we send you out the link to the recording. That's probably the best thing to do. And I think there's a question about the ILR as well, and I can attach the links for that as well. As an answer to the question, because then you'll get the information about that.
Okay, have a look. Someone asking, does it lead to employment? I'm guessing they're wondering if it usually leads to employment.
Yeah, ideally it would lead to employment, but as listed, there are also other outcomes which are good. So somebody developing their English and maths, somebody's family changing their perception that they can work, somebody moving into voluntary work. So yeah, ideally it is paid work, but sometimes it isn't. And again, you need to record that progress to show that the progress has been made.
Okay. Yeah, people are asking if you have to employ them and guarantee paid employment at the end of the term. Well, from what I know, you don't necessarily have to employ the people, but if you feel like you want to employ them, then that's great. I guess it's whatever positions you have at the time. You know, they've done the internship program. If you'd like them, then employ them. But it's not. You don't have to guarantee that they work there. It's a stepping stone towards that.
And I think it's really important for employers to understand that, because otherwise it can be something which makes them think that they don't want to offer a supported internship.
Someone asked if you can do an internship twice, for example, 2 separate academic years.
Mm-hmm. You'd have to talk to your local authority about the individual to find out that. I think it's more likely that they would do like a progression pathway through your college. So where I've seen people in their foundation learning departments, they've offered a year, which is a transition onto a supported internship, which will be practicing things like independent travel and a shorter work placement potentially, before they move on to a full supported internship. So it might be better to think, rather than doing one twice, which could be difficult to get the funding for, that you have a progression year onto a supported internship.
So are we going to provide links for relevant funding and stuff, information on funding?
Yeah, we'll put, I will.
A lot of people are asking that.
Yeah, I'll send the links around the ILR and the template for applying to Access to Work. I'll send that around when we send you the link to the recording of this webinar.
Okay. I think it's all just about the
yeah. So, and we've got a question here about, can additional government funding be access to support training job coaches with systematic instructions, for example? If so, do I know of any useful links? No, I don't at the moment, but again, we will put something into when we send you the link to this webinar, because the government have just announced 9.7 million into setting up these supported internship forums, and job coaching is also something they see that money being used for. That's only just been announced just before Christmas, so exactly how that's going to be used and allocated, I don't think is clear at the moment, but I will see what information I can find so that I can send that out to you.
This is a good question as well. With only one job coach, how do you support each intern into their placement if you have a group of 10, so that hours aren't affected?
I think with a group of 10, you would potentially find that one job coach wasn't enough, and everybody is going to need a different amount of job coaching. It's really important that people do get the right amount of job coaching to make this work for them, and that's when maybe you can think about Access to Work if you need some additional funding for your job coaching. But it really is key to the success to make sure that people have got enough job coaching, and I would suggest that one job coach for 10 people isn't going to work. So again, you need to look at your numbers and your funding to see how you can make it work for you.
Okay, one sec. Can you answer the very first question there? This one there.
Okay, so yeah, the question here is, where have I got the information from in regards to a learner doing a supported internship with an EHCP? I've got that information from the local authority where I live, because I know that they do that through adult education, and the information about using it with Access to Work and Element 1 is by talking to another college who have used that model to be able to get people onto supported internships.
Someone else was asking about the academic level. What academic level is this aimed at?
So the academic level will again depend on the learner and the intern, and so they might be at level 2, level 3, or they might be pre-entry at entry levels, entry 2, entry 3. It just depends on the individual.
What kind of companies are providers partnering with for the job coach role? Would the LA signpost to these?
Yeah, people are partnering with employment and training providers. The local authority might be able to signpost them to you. I know some local authorities provide the job coaches themselves. Again, it depends on your local authority, so that's why it's important to have a conversation with them. But for example, Pure Innovations, who are on the film about Manchester Airport, that's a training provider who provide employment services, and they provide job coaching. So it's really good to look who's in your local area, who it is you could have those conversations with, so that you could tap into their expertise.
So the same kind of question, do they have to have a minimum level of English and maths? So what is it?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any minimum level of English and maths. It's about somebody having the motivation to work and the desire to do that and some of the skills already to do just that.
Someone asking for statistics on how many people are on the supported internship.
Do you have current statistics for those academic year, for those on a supported internship? Yeah, that was in one of the previous slides. So it's something like 715 people. That seems incredibly low to me. It might be, as I said, that it's not being recorded properly on the ILR at the moment. So when the DFE pull down their figures, it's not correct. However, I also know that people are offering supported internships to very small groups of people, and so it might be that that's the case, and it actually is 715 people. So it's very small numbers. The government, Ofsted, are very keen to see that increase, which is why now is a really key time to be thinking about setting up your supported internships.
Okay. One more people asking about funding.
Yeah. So we've got the question here. From your experience, do students get more out of a day's teaching at college or an hour each day on site? What do you think, Aidan?
That's a good question, actually. I don't know. I guess that depends on the individual, but I'd say both of them are equally as good. I think being taught the role is important, but also learning on the job is just as good as well.
Yeah, so I think you have to think about making the model work for you. I think both work really well and both have advantages and disadvantages. People do really value getting together and being able to discuss how things are going and the challenges that they're facing and how have peer support and how to overcome that. But I think, again, it depends on your model and your individual setting, because I think both have advantages and disadvantages, which you need to weigh up and think, how's that going to work for you?
In terms of outcomes for learners, what is seen as a positive progression?
Okay, so a positive progression from a supported internship would be into employment, but as we've mentioned before, it would be also other things like moving into voluntary work or building your CV, showing other people that you can work, all those other things which we listed earlier in the webinar. Is good progression. Generally, I think it's considered that about 50% of people on a supported internship should go on to paid employment.
Okay, one sec, I'm just sorting through them. Okay, there's only. How can you assure a student is not being double funded through high needs funding and access to work?
I don't know that I absolutely know the answer to that, but I don't think it is considered double funding. I think if a student is funded to go on a supported internship, they can also be funded through access to work for something like the job coach. So colleges have used access to work to pay for their job coaching.
Does there have to be accredited qualifications?
No. So does it have to be accredited qualifications? No, there doesn't. Again, that needs to be very individualized. So where the person is able to take an accredited qualification and that adds value, then it's good to do. And in English and maths, it's the same. So you need to show progress. They don't need to take the accreditation, but if they can, then they should be doing that.
Okay. Okay.
So what happens if somebody is offered employment during the program? So that can be really positive, and it means that you can support the person whilst they're in the job, so they have an additional transition period.
Okay, and the last question is there a way of funding training period for job coaches prior than having a caseload when the funding starts?
Okay, so another question about training for job coaches. So again, I think we're going to have to find out some information about that additional funding that's just been released by the government. And I know they've mentioned job coaching in that. And so I'll try and find out more from NatSpec about that and give you that information when we send you out the link to the webinar.
Someone asked a question. Sharon just asked, any evidence?
Any evidence of what?
Not sure.
Okay. Okay, so what we'll do...
Okay, here we go.
Sorry, here it comes.
Are there any specific evidence that is required in relation to the internships as student evidence?
Specific evidence?
So I guess it means evidencing in work or something.
As in student evidence. I'm not quite sure that I understand this question. What I'll do is I'll look at it again, and we're nearly at past, so I will consider that and send out any answers I think are relevant when we send you out the link to the webinar. So we haven't answered all of the questions, but we'll summarise them and we'll send them out to you with a link to the recording. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope it's been useful.